Welcome. You are at the CCC,
where there are no outside issues. I'm Anthony. I'm a 7th-year doctoral student in clinical psych, an addict and an alcoholic, another bozo on the bus, and I care about you.
A bozo on the bus. And I'm LouiLou, and I am in recovery for crystal meth and alcohol. I am a former Miss Castro Country Club. I am always in search of balance. And each week we will provide and create a brave space where we can engage in conversations around topics of recovery.
Our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for more people in recovery by tackling issues sometimes used to separate us.
Yes, but before we do that, please like, comment, and share this episode and ding that bell.
All right, the disclaimer. Okay. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on At the CCC are ours alone. We do not represent anyone but ourselves. The material and information shared here is for general information purposes only. In other words, we are just friends behind a mic here to entertain you.
Entertain, have a kiki. I like the kiki part, but I know
you do like the kiki part. We can put it back in.
Let's have a kiki.
Let's have
and then Brandon can pay. Let's have a kiki in the background.
And then we can get sued or something.
I know. Exactly. We can't afford that. So yeah, you don't have to say let's have a kiki.
Okay. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. This has been a good week. I was a little sick last week for a bit, but we had Spring Fling. That's your drag show that we have through the Western Round of Living Sober. Mm-hmm. I hosted it with Labeline. It was a lot of fun.
Y'all were incredible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, y'all were incredible.
A lot of
fun. So this past weekend was filled with a lot of things. I went to Spring Fling. That was great. And then the following day, I went to the Castro Country Club's 40th anniversary.
It looked like a lot of fun. I was super envious.
Yeah, there were over 200 people there. The food was amazing.
Where was the food from?
Yeah, I don't know where the food was from.
What kind of food?
Okay. I'll tell you what it was. There were these fried chicken sliders with coleslaw. There were biscuits. There was this like tofu peanut butter, like it I don't know what it was, but it was like peanut butter. It was amazing. Then there was this corn salad off the hook. What else was there? Drinks. Then we had mocktails. There were these 2 mocktails that were really good. Thank you, Eve. Yeah. They were the one was called, I think, Bowl of Fruit, and the other one had a name I don't know how to pronounce.
What's the name of Eve's company? Is it like
Eve has a company?
Yeah.
Maybe Keep Coming Back Bar? Is that all it's called?
Yeah, and it's
that's so clever.
On alternative, non-alcoholic alternative.
Okay, so this is crazy because I thought he had just like found a book and made these things. They were so good.
Yeah, no.
They were so good. And like generally I don't like eating fruit post drink, but the fruit was even good afterward. Like in the one drink that I had, the bowl of fruit one.
Huh? You like fruit.
It was so good. That was low hanging fruit. I didn't mean it. Oh, no pun intended. Okay, so today's topic is casual sex.
Ooh.
Casual sex in recovery.
Yes. Okay.
And can I tell you right now that in thinking about today's episode, I've been so like activated and anxious about this conversation and like super uncomfortable for a number of different reasons. I don't know. Oh, Brandon, there was a mosquito in the light and Brandon just killed it. But what I want to say is that just thinking about this topic has made me very anxious.
No, it's like, I'm sorry, because the topic was in my mind, but I haven't been thinking about it up to now.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like anyway, so it's made me very anxious. And I've thought a lot about like, well, why does this make me anxious? And I think part of it is because at least, within the last year, one of the things that I've been working on in recovery is my relationship to sex and my relationship to other people. Mm-hmm. And, what are my motivations for my relationships? How do I show up for other people, both romantically and platonically? Right. And that stuff has always been anxiety inducing because like my earliest experiences with sex and my earliest experiences in relationship in general have all been fraught, like I didn't have a lot of healthy models growing up.
Absolutely.
Relationship models growing up, and figuring out like my sex life or sexuality in general has also felt very clumsy for me and often has led to, drama for lack of a better word.
No, I understand.
Yeah. What have you thought about? You said you weren't thinking about it.
No, because one of the things I take in consideration. For me, I went through that in early recovery. I have to remember that I've been in the program for a bit, and so where it might seem like I'm completely like, I guess it wasn't an issue. It probably was an issue, and I dealt with it. So this last, I was just excited about having this conversation.
Okay,
because I think that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've just been excited about having the conversation.
So something that, and hopefully this doesn't feel like I'm spilling your tea, but
spill it.
So one of the things I want people to know at home or people listening in is that our experiences are actually quite different from each other with respect to sex and relationships.
Absolutely.
Right. Like I have been in many romantic relationships, sexual relationships, where my history with that is like more relationship heavy. And on your end,
I'm far on the other spectrum. It's like I have made peace with the fact that I'm not really like I'm in relationship with folks, but as far as a loving relationship, not so much. It's like I don't prioritize it. I love the single life. I love being me. I'm open. I like to say this as a disclaimer. I don't know if I'm doing it for other people, but I always say I'm open to the idea. But really, when it has presented itself, I've shut it down.
Interesting.
No, exactly. And I was thinking it's like maybe there's something deeper, and that's another show. But in this moment right now, I'm whole, perfect, and complete.
Okay, so sorry.
No, I'm whole, perfect, and complete, and I've accepted where I'm at.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
I love it as you're spilling my tea.
Yeah.
Spill it, girl. Spill it.
So I want to add a container to this conversation. And so I was doing some research and I came across, well, first off, I want to direct folks. What are they called? I think it's called Very Well Mind. Very Well Mind does, it's a pro-science, pro-mental health website, and they have this great, I think, article on casual sex and its impact on mental health.
Can we talk about, like, we had a conversation before about like how we show up and what we represent, and I was suggesting that that Anthony is like rooted in facts and I'm rooted in feeling. Like the way we prepare, especially the way we prepare, like Anthony, and we had a lovely conversation about because you were talking about how anxious you were.
Yeah.
The first thing that you decided to do was to dive in. And I think that that's really kind of what makes what we do together special.
Yeah.
Because the way that I've researched this was I just had a moment and I thought, this is what I experienced, and so I'm going to talk about that.
Well, before we move on, let's give some of that some more meat, right? So one of the things I was explaining to Louis is that for me, like I have such a hard time knowing how to feel about a situation. Like, I have a formal PTSD diagnosis from shit that happened from when I was like younger, and of course when I was in active addiction. And so one of the things that's really difficult for me is trusting how I feel and trusting how I think. And so often what I do is like I will defer to something else. So like I was in a conversation with someone I care about very much recently, and I didn't know how to react. Like I didn't know what the healthy response was. So I literally like jumped online and started researching articles about what are kind of healthy ways of responding to this particular situation. So for me, turning to like, say, quote unquote facts or science is because often I don't have like the emotional vocabulary personally, right? Like I can do it as like a clinician. I can show up for people and I can hold that container. But when it comes to my own feelings, especially to things that are really sensitive, I have to go to facts first. The last thing I'll say is like, I have a tendency to think my feelings rather than feel my feelings, which is, nor here nor there. And I think like one of the things I'm working on is like kind of arriving at a place where I can actually have my feelings and not feel like I always have to think them or control them, et cetera.
I love that. It's like we're getting there.
Yeah. And you've been such a good model for me. And I think I've talked about that before, because what I came down to is 12 step, right? Like I've literally had to work these principles in all of my affairs. And recently it's been in friendships, both romantic and platonic, et cetera.
Absolutely. I think for me, it's like I got to a place where I realized that, I'm going to have to stumble through. I'm going to absolutely have to stumble through and not be afraid to have egg all over my face or to look like a damn fool.
Right.
And so I think that's, because I was listening to you and I definitely have had moments where I didn't know what to feel. And so I just felt it. The gift of recovery for me is that I have every year that I'm sober and doing the work, I heard someone else say this. I have an extra moment of pause. I don't have to react because usually it's like reacting to what I was feeling was causing me the issues. But now I get to like think about it, go talk to somebody that I trust, and then I process it because I process the hell out of stuff.
Right. Yeah. I love that as a segue for our conversation today, because in doing research, there was this one article I came across. It's called "Emotional Outcomes of Casual Sexual Relationships and Experiences," and this was published. It's from 2020, and it's in the Journal of Sexual Research. And I like this particular article because it reviewed 71 other articles, and it was trying to basically find themes around casual sex. And what I arrived at after reading through it is that there's nothing casual about casual sex.
Thank you. I was thinking about that.
Right.
That's what I came up with. I'm all, as much as we want to believe casual sex is casual, there's nothing casual. You are right. In it.
There are, and let me explain why I say this. And this is in my opinion. The reason why I think there's nothing casual about casual sex is because whether there are positive or negative consequences, there is definitely an impact. Mm-hmm. And so when I hear the word casual, what I'm assuming is like low stakes. What I'm assuming is like fewer containers. I'm assuming there's this kind of relaxed, and to me that feels really very misleading.
I like that containers. It's like I just want to say this is a soundbite. I really like containers.
So you know about like I have the worst ADHD.
I'm sorry.
The worst. Okay, so there's nothing casual about it. There are implications for casual sex, whether you are compartmentalizing in order to separate intimacy from physical pleasure, whether you are negotiating things with yourself or other people. In my opinion, there's nothing casual about it. And the thing about the research is that the research is pretty inconclusive. There are some studies that say it's healthy and it has positive outcomes. There are other studies that say that it's not so healthy and it doesn't have positive outcomes, right? But the point is that it's fraught and there's no kind of one way of looking at it, right? Mm-hmm. However, where I landed with this is that, and I think about this the way I would as an addict and an alcoholic, right? These studies may work out great for people who are maybe do not have addictive personalities, maybe do not have the sensitivities that I have. But as an addict and an alcoholic, my doing things that bring me pleasure, that has for me, that has certain implications for my life, right? Like I have, for example, had casual sex dissociatively, right? Like I've just done it to escape how I'm feeling, and maybe that's okay, right? But then I've also, I've had a history of having sex compulsively, right? Where that has had negative consequences as well.
Yeah, I think that okay, so the only way I could possibly the only way sex can even be close to casual is if I do all the legwork leading up to it, meaning working my 4-step. And for those of you who don't understand the steps, there's a section in the 4-step that's about a sexual idea, but mainly an inventory and deciding how I've been showing up for sex. If I'm doing that consistently and I'm living my sexual idea that I've created as a result of understanding how I showed up, then it's making sure that I'm not going against the grain when I'm connecting with folks. Like if I'm hooking up with someone, a big thing for me is if I'm hooking with someone who's not present, that's a problem, and that's going to cause me a problem beyond that. But I've had some of the best connections where it's a connected sex. We're not trying to be in a relationship. We may not do it again, but it's like I've talked about before. I have the boyfriend experience, mm-hmm. where we are in this moment. We know exactly what this is. We are unafraid of communicating back and forth. And that's about as casual as it's going to get for me.
Right. One of the things I have been trying not to do is I've been trying not to pathologize how I respond to a situation. right? Like, for example, I have a lot of fear around closeness, especially like romantic closeness. And so much shit comes up for me. And I've had to be so careful not to like beat myself up for having a feeling.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think like around casual sex, like, I feel like one of the important distinctions that we have to make as like a queer recovery podcast is that I do think there is a distinction between the way the queer community has made allowances or has been flexible around parameters around sex and maybe say like the broader population.
Oh, absolutely. Because we don't necessarily like, it's like you were saying before, like we don't have like all of these amazing role models, examples of how to be in a queer relationship. And a lot of times I think what happens is that we try to, I'll just speak for this. We try to mirror what happens in a heterosexual relationship, and it doesn't always work because you've got two, whether it be two men, two women, whatever. It's like the dynamics they're just not there. And also, depending on whatever other baggage you've brought into the situation, whether or not it's you believe that you are not worthy and you only believe that you are about the sex and all that. There's so many like variables that come into play. Yeah.
So that I think the distinction between, so already I'm already feeling like we do not have enough time to talk about everything that's like coming up. So we might have to have a sequel.
I think we should.
Yeah. So my first thought here is that although, okay, heterosexual people have had their relationships modeled for them for a very long time. Yeah. Now, let's not assume, for example, that those models have been perfect, right? And let's also not assume that there are straight people out there who are also learning how to define their own relationships. That being said, I also sometimes wonder, like, so sometimes I feel like there's a pressure for like polyamory, or there's like a pressure to be open, and I'm like, well,
in the gay community?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, at least like in a big city, right? I haven't had that experience in like smaller towns. Like where I'm from, gay men are not in open relationships. Yeah. Generally, where I'll hear like everyone and their mother's in an open relationship. And that's no judgment, right? Like no judgment there. I bring that up to say that sometimes I feel like there's like a pressure, right? Like there's a part of me that's like, well, Anthony, what is wrong with you that like you can't get around to it? But then also there's a part of me that's like, also gets confused because I'm like, oh, I've actually like under the right context, under the right situation, I could be in an open relationship. I was talking to someone recently who was saying to me like, Anthony, it's really about like security and safety. Like if you have that security and you have that safety with someone, then there are some certain things that feel like they don't really have like the same emotional charge, right?
Yeah.
So there's that, right? And then there's also things like religion and culture and how that influences how we think about sex in our relationships to other people.
Yeah, I thought we had a comment.
We have a comment. Let's look at that. Stephanie Rinker says, "Don't mirror heroes."
Heroes.
I don't get it. What are you saying, Stephanie?
Explain, Stephanie. And we love you, Stephanie, even though you like to give me a Jaylon.
Okay, Jaylon writes, I think the topic of casual sex and recovery is interesting because based off many shares that I've heard, the common denominator is us as a culture don't know how to have platonic relationships. Also, sex seems to be the thing that takes so many of us about.
Thank you, Jaylon. But you know what? I was going to make this comment. Okay, so like what you were saying about the pressure to be in... Okay, so... my take is I don't think that a lot of people are in active open relationships. I think that they like the idea of open relationship, but I think that it requires a certain level of maturity from all parties, and that all parties don't really possess that. And what makes it even tough is like it's kind of like it is when we come into recovery. We're adults, and one of the things I had to relearn how to do was to load a dishwasher, and that was embarrassing. And I didn't want to say I needed to learn how to load a dishwasher. So if the embarrassment of saying that I can't handle conversations about sex or even being anxious like that, I mean, it requires a level of maturity that I think people don't have, Yeah,
one of the things is like, the person I've been seeing now, we've had these like types of conversations, and they like every single time I feel so like I feel really like uncomfortable. You know what I mean?
Do you feel uncomfortable because you're like Like,
Well, let me finish.
Okay.
So like part of it is
Shut
like,
up, Louis.
Yeah. I was like, you don't even know what you're responding to. So can I have like,
go ahead.
So like for me, because I have a lot of fear, right? Like I have so much fear just around closeness and intimacy, and like, I have relationship wounding from previous relationships and like early like family of origin stuff. And so I think the thing that I fear the most is like the level of vulnerability that I am kind of like arriving with that makes me feel really sensitive. And in that is everything from like comparing myself to other people, to not feeling enough, to, you know what I mean? Like to feeling defective, which, my container for that again is recovery. Like I still think I'm of the opinion that as an not an active addict, an alcoholic, but as an addict and an alcoholic, I have certain sensitivities. I have certain vulnerabilities, right? And as like someone who has like trauma in his history, like I also realize that I need to have I need to be good to my heart. Like I need to be honest with myself. And like a lot of times that means like I have to say the uncomfortable thing, right? And so although a situation might make me anxious, like I have enough strength and wherewithal and enough support to actually kind of like face those things.
Absolutely.
You were going to say something?
Nothing.
Okay. So
No. I realize that, like, and sometimes, and this is me self-correcting on air. Sometimes we have these conversations and I realize we've had conversation before. And so I need to be mindful. I'm speaking about like as if we're continuing the conversation.
Yeah.
It's such a Virgo thing. I don't know if
we're
you have
both
that.
Virgos. Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
It's such a Virgo thing where it's like, I can stop the conversation today and then pick it up 3 months from now.
I'm the same.
As if it's just
I'm the
like,
same.
and so it's
Yeah.
like, but we're also talking to other people. So I need to make sure that I let you finish your thought.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Jaylon, I really appreciate your comments. Stephanie,
Absolutely.
I hope you're out there and thinking through your what we were asking you. Terry writes,
In early recovery, I had a hard time with intimacy. Without meth and alcohol, I found others in the room to practice with safely without strings. Good times. But, I agree with that. There may not be the same kind of strings, but there are strings. But what I've been pretty fortunate, and I know it has to do with recovery, it's like being willing to say, like, okay, so I'm like what I talked about earlier, not wanting to be in a loving relationship. But when I first started hooking up, I would only hook up once because it was dangerously close to a relationship. And now I really like reconnecting because you get to know the person, but I'm open to having a conversation and hey, let's have this conversation, because I think it's unrealistic to think that like, when you're becoming intimate in that way with someone on a continual basis and getting to know them, that you might cop some feelings. And I can't shut them down. I mean, hell, maybe it's that I get to go in through the back door.
so
I get to go into a relationship through the back door. You know how some people wait.
Yeah. So this is interesting because one of the things that I've thought about is, okay, so in my history, one of the things that like I had to learn how to change in recovery is like when I was having sex, I was essentially teaching myself how to separate intimacy from sexual desire or sexual pleasure, right? Mm-hmm. And so I did that for such a long time that when I was finally in like a loving relationship or a close relationship, it was very hard for me to enjoy sex because I only knew sex as something that was emotionally detached. And so like now where I am in recovery is like I've been integrating those things, and that's like a very new experience, and I have to ask myself, like what am I doing? Like what have been the consequences of casual sex, either positive or negative? And one of them is like, okay, like there are these things, like there are power dynamics involved when it comes to casual sex. Sometimes you might have someone who develops feelings, another person who doesn't. You might have one person who, like for example, I know I have a lot of people in my life who like anonymous sex, and for those people, like they are comfortable and prefer to not know the other person, so that it's strictly a sexual relationship, which to me is telling.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so no judgment there, right? I have to ask myself, is that a muscle that I want to develop? Do I want to develop a muscle where I cannot, where I separate sexual pleasure and intimacy, right?
I think it would be like, okay, so I'm sure that that's not what you're trying, but I think it would be really challenging when you're trying to do what you're trying to do. Like, it's challenging for us. It's like when we're performing this very delicate surgery to kind of reclaim ourselves, our sexuality, our, all of that stuff. And yeah, no, there's a lot to go through.
Well, yeah, I wrote that down because I was like, it's so like sometimes it just feels like the emotional fucking heavy lifting involved. Sometimes I have to ask myself, like, I only have so many years on earth. Like, is this really how I want to use my energy?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Go ahead. What were you
No, it's like I'm saying, it's like I've been sharing. I told the story about like COVID and hooking up my apartment or going to the sex club and how it has been confusing. I got to share in this room at a sex and intimacy meeting. And the point for me was that nowadays, you can have intimacy without sex, but you can't have sex without intimacy.
Interesting.
You absolutely
can you explain that?
Well, okay. So for me, like because of the work that I did, I absolutely need to. It's what we're talking about with the feelings and the connection, like the fact that it's not casual. I'm going to be affected every time, whether or not it's good, whether or not it's positive, and if it's not good, that even more so.
Right.
And so to think that I can go along, like you were saying, you were having this unconnected sex or whatever, and to think that that's not affecting me it's just not possible.
Right.
It's affecting me on a level that I may not know right now, but I'm going to have to deal with it at some point.
Right. And I want to come back to what I was saying before about like the parameters in which I think about my sex and romantic life. I think about it as like an addict and an alcoholic. What do I know from my experiences? What I know from my experiences is that every single time I went out, I was involved in a relationship. There was like some type of like emotionally fraught, sexually charged relationship every single time. That's my story. Not everyone's story, but that was certainly my story.
And I'm envious of the people who don't have this problem.
Right. And so that's like the first thing. I know that about myself. The other thing I know about myself is that I'm sensitive. Like I know that like I'm sensitive. I know that like emotionally charged situations can like drain me for days on end. You know what I mean? Like I know this about myself. I know that like my mental health is sensitive, like I know that like I'm the kind of person who needs to go to meetings, who needs to do step work, who needs to have sponsees and commitments in order to feel contained. And so when I think about myself within that framework, right, just that, and then you add in like another human being, just that, another human being, number one. And then you involve like sex, and then you involve like romance or intimacy and all this other stuff. I have to think about like, is this pulling me away from recovery? Is this like healthy for my mental health? You know what I mean? Or is this taking me in another direction? And the things that come up, what do I do with the things that come up? Right. Mm-hmm. But I would be remiss to not acknowledge that it is that complicated for me.
Exactly.
And if there are people out there for whom this is not complicated, please let us know how you do it.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean? But like, it is certainly complicated for me. We have a comment. Terry writes,
go ahead.
You're right, Louis. I lied. There were always strings, but that was part of the learning too. It's hard, but I survived and stayed sober.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Terry.
And those strings are worth it. I think that like, you were saying, for me, what I'm learning the longer that I stay sober is that all of that stuff, which I agree with you is that's a lot, but all of that stuff is my recovery. These are things. If
100%.
If I value them, or if something that I think is important, if I want in my right mind to have a solid, passion, healthy kind of connection or whatever, I've got to do the work.
Right. And what I'm thinking of is,
oh, hey, it's Bonnie Violet.
Bonnie Violet.
Hi, Bonnie Violet.
So nice to see your beautiful face.
I know. Thank you.
When I think about recovery, and when I think, okay, so the thought that's coming to me is when you're first working the third step, right? And you start to picture like what God is of your understanding, right? And for me, when I was doing that was probably one of the coolest experiences I ever had, right? like as a person in recovery, I also know that I can do the same thing with my relationships. Right. I know that I can define my relationships. And sometimes there's like fear and trepidation in that. And I think one of the first things that has saved me is like just fucking being honest with myself. And sometimes being honest with myself is literally just saying like, this hurts me or I'm uncomfortable rather than trying to force myself to be somewhere other than where I am. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's like trying to do things for other people because you think that's what they want instead of doing things for yourself. Yeah. Right. That's where I landed on my feelings about relationship, because I used to watch other folks, and I always thought that I needed that at this point in my recovery, I needed to be there. And the truth of it is I'm exactly where I need to be.
Right. And I love that. And what that brings up for me is that, and sometimes you don't need to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like sometimes you don't need to know. I feel like that's part of one of the like magical things about having a relationship with a power that's greater than myself is that I know that my best ideas are not as good as like my higher power.
You're like Spock or Data. Your best ideas are pretty good.
Thank you.
No, we have a comment.
Let's hear it. Any tips for folks who do have casual sex in recovery? Absolutely. Thank you for that. Bonnie Violet, let's start with you. Do you have any?
So I would encourage you to be, if you are working the steps consistently, if you are in 12-step, I think that it's really important to take your temperature. And the steps help us to take our temperature, but I think it's important to know where you are and really kind of understand what your motives for doing it. Like if you are feeling, sometimes we do it because we're feeling lonely, we feel like we need to be connected or whatever, or, we're just, like I used to tell myself, especially in active addiction, it's like, I am just a sex positive person when in fact I was just trying to fill an empty void.
Right. One of the things I want to add in response to Bonnie Violet's question is that if, again, my opinion, if I pull the lens out and I'm just looking at sexuality for like what sexuality is, right? There really are no right or wrong reasons to have sex.
Absolutely.
Right? Like if you have sex because you're anxious, fuck it. If you have sex because you're lonely, fuck it.
Like, yeah, because you can still do, right, like Terry said, you can still do the work after.
Yeah, like you can do the work after, right? Like, of course, maybe it's less than ideal, whatever the fuck that means. But if I'm working a third step, I have to believe that everything that is happening is exactly as it should be. And if for example, I learn after a sexual encounter that like, hey, that didn't work for me, fine. Right. But like this idea that there's like maybe a right and a wrong way, I feel like that's not a good place to start. I think the best place to start is to believe, especially if you're in recovery. This is my advice to people in recovery. And if you're not in recovery, there's probably an adaptation to it, is to believe that whether it works out or it doesn't work out, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, that right or wrong, like you said, is going to cause some, that's what would cause me to be anxious because I want to do everything right Yeah,
and I think some other practical things is like, don't fucking go at things alone. You know what I mean? It's like, is so, well, I knew you were going to go there. And after I said it, I was like, Anthony, you just like tossed Lewis a bone.
Thank you.
So, but basically it's like, I think with everything and anything, it is so important for me to stay connected with the fellowship, with people I love, to not keep secrets. That's such a big bone.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Because it was like, I was like, oh, I feel like sometimes I walk right into stuff, but I think it's just so important to like stay connected with people, and it's like, and if you're having a fucking feeling, like there's no reason to call that feeling good or bad. Like just take that to a trusted friend, take it to a meeting, take it somewhere, like you don't have to kind of like suffer in silence and by yourself. So I think what I'm trying to say here is like, stay connected with people, be real about like what comes up for you. Yeah. And if it hurts, that's okay. You know what I mean? And if you feel like, for me, like what I wish someone would have told me, years ago is like, you know what, like if it's uncomfortable, it's uncomfortable. It doesn't need to have a reason. Right. And you also don't need to be like talked in and out of things. I think that's
absolutely.
The first thing. We have a comment.
Let's take it.
Terry writes, a frequent question from sponsees. how do you navigate confusing intimate friendships in the rooms with romantic relationships? You know, Lewis and I, thank you for that, Terry. Lewis and I were actually just having that conversation. Do you want to go back to?
Okay.
So how do you navigate confusing intimate? So this is a good question. In my experience with this is like, I've had to think about that. The reason why I've had to think about it is because there was a time when I thought like, oh, like this is not something that impacts me, right? And I think this goes back to what Jaylon was writing before, right? What Jaylon was talking about, if I remember correctly, is this idea that like that forming friendships without like sex being involved or it being emotionally like charged in this way, like that's difficult. Okay, that being said, I think there is a way of navigating awkward relationships. The first thing is, I think, is just being honest. Like the first thing is naming it. Like this is uncomfortable, because I think what happens for some people, especially, I mean, people I know, is that they'll just pretend like nothing's happening, or they'll be uncomfortable and they'll gossip about it. And like, there's all this, and so it's like, you can take the energy out of a situation if you fucking just take that shit right to the person that you're having the issue with. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. The second thing is kind of like a 10 step, right? If you're not familiar with 10 step, you like realistically, like if I was talking to a sponsee, like I need to look at that data. You know what I mean? If I did it once and it didn't work out and it was uncomfortable, like I need to learn from that situation, and I have to figure out a way, okay, like what were the needs that I was trying to have met in that situation that didn't work out for me?
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, I don't know. It's like, well, a lot of what you said is like right on. I used to always say like, for me, and I'll compare it to a crush. You know what crushes are for me? I crushed him. Like I usually like I don't know. It's like I don't know that I've had that issue.
Well, tell the people why you haven't had that issue.
I don't know. It's like I just okay. So I use the way that I've used the rooms. Like I've obviously had intense, not I want to say feelings or connections or been attracted to folks or whatever, but honestly, I just am like, has this mantra. It's like all sex isn't good sex, and I really rely on don't dip your pen in a company ink. You know what? There are some places that I just don't need to do what I'm doing. You know, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong, but for me, I hold this space for me sacred. Kind of like what I was talking about, my sacred bit. And as much as I would want to, like I flirt like crazy. I am an incurable flirt. I don't mind, but that's innocent. And there might be something in that where I was like, I'm not willing to go any further. I don't know if I'm a realist or whatever. If there's a situation where I'm really feeling somebody, I agree with you. Put it out there. Talk about it. You know what? Or I talk about it ad nauseum with my sponsee or people that I trust. But a gift is always when you see that person with somebody else. I love that. It's like when you finally realize that, you know, this is what that is, you know. I don't even know if I'm landing on it, because I was just speaking about it with you about, you know, I rely on you for actual like examples, because
so I think so. There's what comes up for me. The first thing that comes up for me is like, yes, I get that. We shouldn't shit where we eat. We shouldn't dip our pen in the company ink. I get that.
Oh no, and let me qualify. Mm-hmm. No judgment, because I really feel like, you know, just like you find your relation, your connection, friendships or whatever, there is nothing wrong. I've seen some amazing relationships
absolutely
that start there. It's like there is no rule. There's absolutely no rule.
Yeah. So the first, absolutely, I agree. We're on the same page when it comes to that. And I think like the one thing I want to say is like, it happens. And it happens for good reason. It happens because we have a shared vocabulary in the rooms. It happens because we feel connected with each other. It happens because as gay men, they're like, that's a small community.
Yeah.
To be a sober gay man, that's a smaller community. And we are naturally going to gravitate.
To be a sober gay man in the Castro, that's an even smaller
community.
That's
an even smaller community.
I think we have a comment. But
no, I think he was telling us that there were 5 minutes left.
Oh,
and there is a comment. Let's see it.
All right now.
Jaylon writes, do you want to take that?
A problem for me has been trying to cultivate what healthy is for me. Casual hookups for me have always been tied to getting a need met. But now in recovery, I think that the transactionality of that doesn't sit well, because not only do I want to feel safe with the person that I'm having sex with, but I also want to remember they are a person too and not just an object. Absolutely.
Yeah. Jaylon, I can relate to that to the extent that I understand it.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about this next
week.
Yeah,
there's going to be a sequel. So the other thing I wanted to say, and then we have 5 minutes and we're going to continue on off air, and you just go to like all the things and find us for the rest of the conversation. But I like to think about recovery and the rooms as a spiritual sandbox, right? My friend Eric A in the rooms talks about like the spiritual sandbox. The reason why I like to think about it as a spiritual sandbox is because, like I was saying earlier, as like people who have like a shared vocabulary, who have like context, like a shared context, etc., that's a place like that is a safer space to have conversations. It's a safer space to maybe experiment or like explore like the best sides of yourself, right? Uh-huh. In some cases, like the rooms are generous enough where they allow you to be messy.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But so that's like the first part, is that like, I think especially in recovery, if you're going to do something, like commit to the thing that you're doing and just be upfront about it. I think I had another idea, but it just left me. Good and normal. Nope. That's it. Spiritual sandbox. So we have to start winding down. Brandon gave us because we have 3 minutes left.
Yeah, this is one of those, I love conversations like this where we get into it.
So
the Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBTQ recovery community.
We provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth.
Our vision is to reduce the suffering of addiction by connecting people to community, opportunity, and support.
You can find more information, including all the ways to contact us, at www.castrocountryclub.org/podcast.
Absolutely. And tune in every Tuesday at 4 p.m.-ish Pacific Standard Time when we go live in our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
Anthony LouiLou.
You read everything. Yeah. I really enjoyed the conversation.
It was really good. So we're going to go off camera. Like we've told you before, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, find us wherever you get your podcast. And and until then, we'll see you next week. We'll be talking about casual sex and recovery part 2. Bye.
Absolutely.
Oh, I feel so activated.
All right.
What are your thoughts? What are you thinking?
Nothing. I realize I'm not going to be here next week.
Oh shit! Next week is finance.
Yeah,
we might have to move him.
Well, no, we could. We can take our notes and then talk about the week after. We can just.
Oh right. Okay, yeah, so we should probably put that out.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll listen, take our notes.
We're doing all the legwork. Yeah, the conversation was great. I love like when we get folks like diving in and like participating. I mean, there's so many ways to think about it. Like, and I to completely respect if someone thinks that, casual sex is just casual sex. But I really feel like I've been saying, like everything that looks effortless to me, it only looks effortless because of all the work that I've done leading up to it.
Right.
Like I was thinking to myself, all sex isn't good sex.
Right.
And one of the strengths that I had when I was in my active addiction is if I was not feeling something, I would get up and leave. Mm-hmm. Or I would get up and encourage the person to get the hell out.
Right.
And I think that's why, I have moments in my sex experience where I can be compulsive, but I also, the whole taking my temperature and realizing, okay, this is not right. So stepping back. So it's like, I think that it helps that we were able to come from these different places with that, because I have other things in my life that probably are issues.
What's interesting, I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you saying that. There's a level of kind of vulnerability and exposure there that I really appreciate. Like one of the things like I have to be real with is like, there is a part of me that sometimes thinks like I'm defective. Like I said, when like the camera was on, and I'm not defective. None of us is defective. Nope. Right. And so I think about like, okay, what are these like pains and anxieties that come up for me around casual sex or relationships in general? And, how can I attend to them with like love and compassion and kindness, and how can I put myself in the company of people who can also, like hold that for me?
Absolutely.
That's like the first thing. And like the other part of that too is that, and it's for me, like just keeping it 100 is like, for me, it's confusing. You know what I mean? It's confusing and there's like fear for me. And I wish I was one of those people for whom like these things come easy, but I'm not, and I haven't been for such a long time. And I think, like I've only recently started getting real with myself about it. Like I think last year is when I joined SLAA seriously, because go ahead.
I think that like what you get to pay attention to on my end, what I see is easy and effortless for you that some of us struggle is I was talking to somebody having that conversation about being in a relationship.
Yeah.
That's not easy. That's like, and you are the master or you're one of the masters of the universe where it's like, the fact that you've been in these loving relationships. I
don't know that they've all been loving.
No, but they've had the potential to become loving.
Sure, yeah.
Because to get to a place where to be vulnerable enough to say, hey, I really like you and I want to know you better and I want you to know me better. Because there were times when I'm thinking, am all I good for is the casual sex hookup?
That's
or
real.
The sexual hookup?
That's real.
And that is stuff that I've had to kind of step back and do some work around.
I had this great conversation with, I was about to say his name, but I had this great conversation with... No names. I know two men in the program. A lot of people have been coupling recently. One of my sponsees is married. A good friend of ours, two mutual good friends of ours are getting married soon.
Love that. I'm so glad
I
I'm invited.
love them. Yeah.
I said, am I going to be invited?
How sad would it be if I wasn't invited and we were having this conversation? But I was talking to one of the older guys in the program, and he's been married for a very long time. And I mean, he was describing shit to me that I couldn't handle hearing it. By that, I mean, I was like, oh girl, I don't know how you're doing that. So he was telling me how, they've been together for over 20 years and how they've been to sex parties and that his partner's the one who has a lot of the difficulties around opening up and closing and how what they've done is they've remained flexible around. What the fuck are you doing to the mic?
I'm just playing with the mic. I'm sorry.
Okay. So all of these conversations, and what was amazing to me, and I love where our friend landed here, is he said, what I know is that I want to spend the rest of my life with this man. And that means that we're doing life together. And that means that we're having conversations. And that means that I'm not trying to control who he is and he's not controlling who I am. And that we're finding ways of being together.
Yeah.
And I thought, I love that. What he was saying to me was, I heard two things in that. There was commitment and there was the priority. The priority was to be in relationship, and the commitment was to do what you need to do in order to make that relationship work, so long as it's healthy, right?
This is where I have to be careful, and I think I have a hard time not being a little judgmental. When somebody starts a relationship and it starts out open, I'm all, did you really give that relationship a chance?
Yeah.
I always wonder. Yeah. It's I'm all, yeah. That's easy.
Yeah.
That would seem to be super easy, and it's like the death stamp. What you were talking about with someone who's been, I respect someone who's been in a relationship for over 20 years or whatever, and they decide that we love each other, we like our connection, but
I'm down with that 100%.
Yeah. That makes more sense because you get to know the person in a way.
I love that. Yeah. And I that's the shit that I can co-sign.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, because I feel that's the shit that if together we've built such a solid foundation where it feels unshakable and impenetrable.
Exactly.
I can get down with that, right? Because then we're just two people we're doing life together, literally life partners.
Yeah.
And it, like, but it, that takes time for sure.
But there are those magic moments, or there are those perfect connections where you have folks who do what I was talking about, where they just dive in and then they open a relationship and they last forever and they stay together and it stays perfect and beautiful and it's what's right for them. But I think what I was saying before is like, it's all the work I've done leading up to. Because if I've done the work and I'm solid, because I used to hear this idea that like two people come together, make a whole person. No, two halves don't make a whole person. Two halves make two halves together. Yeah. It's like two healthy people coming together is what I think it takes. And even in that, it's a constant need to kind of say, okay, let's talk about this. This has to change. Like, I think that folks are like, and I hear, like, I'm not an expert in relationships, but especially folks in open relationships or who do, like, it's almost as if, like, we do, and I think globally, we do what we think the other person wants us to do and don't really, like, forget to, like, pay attention to what it is that we need. Like say, I dive into this open relationship. I dive into this whatever relationship and it's not for me. Mm-hmm. And instead of just, I think we've talked about this before. I used to let things just happen. And instead of taking action, I would let them go so bad and deteriorate so bad that they would happen. And stuff. Like either you make a choice or the choice would be made for you.
Right.
And I feel, it's interesting. I feel like this conversation is becoming something different. Mm. Like we can probably even have a conversation about like.
About what?
I don't know. It's like I'm all the things behind like choices,
What about, like, say more about that? What do you mean?
Well, like owning your choices, understanding why you make choices, and how to avoid having other people influence those choices. I don't know. Yeah, in connection with relationship and all that.
Yeah, I hear like what I'm hearing something, and the thing that I'm hearing is it's a difference between like being inspired versus like reacting, right? And it's to be inspired. One of the things my sponsor encouraged me to do today was like, he said, like, why don't you sit down, meditate, like take this question or this feeling to God and meditate and see what happens, right? Yeah. That's it. So so what comes from that is inspired, right? That's a very different, that's solid, right? Like that's grounded, that's safe for the most part, I guess, in my experience. So that's one way of making decisions. And the other one, which is like what you were describing, is like reacting to the world. It's like, oh, in order to appease this other person, I'm going to do this other thing. Right. And it would be interesting to know, like, why is that the option? Like, why is that the choice that you're making? And for some, it's like, well, you weren't allowed to have boundaries growing up, and you had a parent whose love was conditional. And so, you felt the need to always do things to make them happy. And so you never got to develop your own personality or your own values, Absolutely. You for some people who come into the rooms, they don't have like a sense of self-worth or self-esteem. Right. And so they spend a lot of time trying to be superlative in some way, like to be the most entertaining, the most funny, exactly. Like the most beautiful, right? That is,
this is connected. It's connected some way. It almost feels like, and everything that we're in a society. We have a society where changing your mind is not okay,
right?
Where it's like, this is the way you think, and you're always going to think this way, and you can't change your mind. And I was thinking more politically too, but it's in everything else. Like, it's like, and we bought into that. Like, and this is what I was saying, like in early, in my active addiction even now, if I'm not feeling a situation, this is why I loved the idea of going to the sex clubs. If I'm not feeling you, if I'm not feeling our connection, then what I would do is I lovingly kiss the person on the back. You can tell my position or I thank them and I'd say, yeah, but this is not working out for me.
Yeah.
And it was when I started doing that and not just going through with the experience.
Good for you.
That I was finding like strength, realizing that, this is not a slight on them. it's really, like you said, it's me guarding my heart.
Yeah. You're picking you.
Yeah, I'm picking me because it's like, and this had everything to do with this relationship to a sexual idea, and not just having it on a piece of paper, but really kind of living it and believing it, and believing that I am worth it and I'm worth becoming that for myself.
You know, there was this, there's this famous philosopher, Michel Foucault, and
I love it.
Michel Foucault.
Say it again.
I know. I felt so like I cringed a little bit because that sounds so pretentious. But I'm bringing up Foucault. Foucault was
own it.
Foucault was a leather daddy. Foucault was part of the scene out in California. Was at Berkeley for a while. Anyway, so Foucault, he talks about, I forget what the paper is, but he talks about, so I'm going back to this idea of like decision making and like changing your mind. And so he wrote this criticism for the legal system. And he said that what the legal system tries to do is it tries to replicate the scientific method. It tries to replicate science. And by that, he meant that the legal system is trying to like find formulas, right? Like if you do this, it has this outcome, right? And we standardize that so that we can be fair. But what he points out is that unlike the scientific method or science, like scientists realize that they only know what they know when they know it. Mm-hmm. And that if new information presents itself, then you change your theory, right? Like you have to go about things differently. Our laws don't necessarily work that way. Similarly, I think like a lot of the ways that people think are informed by how like laws are shaped, right? Because that's a whole other conversation. Uh-huh. But you're pointing to something that I think a lot of people struggle with, right? Because it's scary to think, for example, like what happens if I don't believe this thing that has kept me safe all my life? Right.
And that is the thing that has caused so much trouble lately.
For you?
Like, no, for a lot of folks. It's like I've dug my heels into this thought or belief, and I'm not willing to let go of it, even though I have perfect examples of why it is bullshit.
Right. Right. And that's what the character defects are, right? Yeah. Like these things have protected us for such a long time, right? So to not act on that thing is terrifying.
Yeah.
Right. Because, and that's where like having faith in a power greater than ourselves comes from, right? It's like, I have to believe.
You know, the last thing I'm going to say, because we're going to wrap up soon. It's interesting that when we have other conversations, they always go to sex, and we have conversation about sex and it goes to something else.
Well, I feel like literally everything always ends up back on God.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Every time, like all of our conversations, like every conversation we've had usually like lands back there. Yeah, I think that the last thing I want to say, because, you know, we have like 2 minutes left, is, right. And so we act on these things like, it feels dangerous, I think, for a lot of people to let go of old ideas because those ideas have contained us or people for such a long time. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've learned is that, like, in order for me to have a different experience, I have to allow myself to have a different experience, which sometimes means that I'm having to deal with fear that comes up for me. I'll end with this. There was, I forget who it was. I think it was Alan Watts who said, you know, if you fear a ghost, walk through it and you'll realize that there was nothing ever there. Right. And I feel like that's something that takes it takes an enormous amount of faith, right? Like you have to believe that there's going to be a container or something or someone who's going to like tell you, hey, you're going to be okay. Mm. And I think that's where we end.